Kale's fist slammed into the side of her head before she even finished her first sentence. The crack echoed across the training yard like a gunshot. Riley hit the sand, hard blood already running from her lip, and 18 SEALs stood there watching like it was entertainment. "Drag her off my base," Kale said, shaking out his hand, not even breathing hard. "I don't train with little girls." He turned his back on her. That was his mistake. Because behind him, Riley Voss spit blood into the sand, rose to her feet without making a sound, and said 5 words that froze every man on that yard dead where they stood. "I warned you, Senior Chief. If you're watching this right now, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels." Now let's get into it. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and Senior Chief Petty Officer Damon Kale almost didn't answer it. He was sitting in his office at the Naval Special Warfare Center at Coronado, a cup of black coffee going cold on his desk, reviewing after-action reports from a training evolution that had gone sideways the week before. 2 of his guys had gotten sloppy during close-quarters drills. One ended up with a fractured wrist, the other with a bruised ego that was somehow harder to fix. Kale picked up the phone on the 4th ring. "Kale." The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Elias Morrow, the commanding officer 2 levels above him, and his tone was the kind of flat that meant the decision had already been made. "Senior Chief, you're getting a guest instructor starting Monday. Hand-to-hand combat specialist. The orders came from Warcom. It's not a request." Kale leaned back in his chair. "A guest instructor. For my platoon." "That's correct." "Sir, with all due respect, my guys don't need a guest instructor. We run our own combatives program. We've been running it for 6 years, and the results speak for themselves." There was a pause on the other end. Then Morrow said, "Her name is Riley Voss." And Kale blinked. "Her dish 22 years old, civilian contractor with a classified background in combat systems. She's trained with units in 4 countries. She holds certifications in 7 martial disciplines. I'm told she's the real deal. Damon." Kale didn't say anything for a long time. He stared at the wall across from his desk, where a framed photo of his first platoon hung alongside a Bronze Star citation and a set of dog tags that belonged to a friend who didn't come home from Ramadi. 22 years old, Kale repeated slowly, like he was tasting something rotten. "A 22-year-old woman is going to teach my SEALs how to fight. She's going to consult on technique refinement and advance close combat methodology." Those are the words in the orders. "What she actually does on your training yard is between you and her. And if I push back, then I will remind you that this came from Warcom, and you'll do it anyway." The line went dead. Kale sat there for a full minute, his jaw working, his fingers wrapped around the coffee mug so tight the knuckles had gone white. Then he picked up the mug and threw it against the wall. He told his guys that afternoon. He gathered the 18 men of his platoon in the briefing room, stood at the front with his arms crossed, and said, "We're getting a babysitter." The laughter was immediate, loud. The kind of laughter that only comes from men who have been through hell together and think nothing on earth can surprise them anymore. "Who is it?" asked Petty Officer First Class Marco Delaney, a massive man with a shaved head and forearms like bridge cables. He was the platoon's top hand-to-hand fighter, a guy who'd once choked out a Taliban commander in a doorway during a nighttime raid. "Civilian contractor," Kale said. "Name's Riley Voss." "What branch?" someone asked from the back. "No branch. She's a civilian." The room got quieter. Not silent, but quieter in the way that happens when confusion starts to replace amusement. "A civilian," Delaney said, "teaching us combatives. That's what the orders say." "Is this some kind of evaluation? Are they testing us?" I asked the same thing. Answer is no. She's supposed to be some kind of specialist. 7 martial arts certifications, trained with foreign units. "How old, Barney?" asked Petty Officer Second Class Travis Webb, a lean, wiry operator who served as the platoon's intelligence lead. Webb was the thinker, the one who asked the questions everyone else was too proud to ask. Kale paused. He knew what was coming. 22. The room erupted. Not with laughter this time, but with a sound that was closer to disbelief. The kind of noise men make when they think someone is playing a joke on them and they're waiting for the punchline. 22, Delaney said, standing up from his chair. "Senior Chief, I've got boots older than that." "Sit down, Marco." "No, seriously, I've got underwear that's seen more combat than a 22-year-old civilian. What's she going to teach us? How to stretch before yoga?" The room laughed again, harder this time. Kale let it go for a few seconds, then he held up a hand and the room went silent. That was his power. One hand and 18 of the most dangerous men in the world shut their mouths. "I don't like it either," Kale said, But the orders came from the top and we follow orders. She shows up Monday. We treat her with baseline professionalism. We let her do her little demonstration. And then she goes home and tells whoever sent her that the men of this platoon don't need help from a kid in cargo pants. He looked around the room. Every man was nodding. Any questions? Webb raised his hand. What if she's actually good? Nobody answered. Nobody even considered it. Monday came with fog rolling off the Pacific and a cold that cut through clothing like it had a personal grudge. Cale stood at the edge of the training yard with his arms folded, his jaw set, watching the gate. His platoon was already assembled. 18 men standing in two loose rows, dressed in fatigues, their energy restless and sharp. They'd spent the weekend talking about this, joking about it, making bets on how long the demonstration would last before the girl either quit or got hurt. Delaney had put $20 on under 5 minutes. At exactly 0800, a gray sedan pulled through the gate and parked at the edge of the lot. The driver's door opened, and Riley Voss stepped out. She was not what any of them expected. She was 5'6", maybe 5'7", dark brown hair pulled back in a low bun. No makeup, no jewelry. She wore an olive green t-shirt that hung loose on her frame, camouflage cargo pants, and a pair of tactical boots that looked like they'd been worn across several continents. She carried nothing. No bag, no clipboard, no folder of credentials. She walked toward the training yard with a stride that was neither fast nor slow. It was measured, controlled, like every sum had been calculated in advance. Cale felt the energy shift behind him. The joking had stopped. There was something about the way this woman moved that didn't match the picture they'd all painted in their heads. She didn't walk like a civilian. She didn't walk like someone who was nervous. She walked like someone who had done this exact thing in this exact kind of place many times before. She stopped 10 feet in front of Cale and looked at him. Not up at him, at him. Even though he had 6 inches and 100 pounds on her, the geometry of her gaze was level. Senior Chief Cale, she said. Not a question. That's right. You're Voss, Riley Voss. I appreciate you making time. I didn't make time. I was ordered to. If the words stung, she didn't show it. Her expression didn't change. Not a flinch, not a blink, not a flicker of anything that could be read as weakness. Fair enough, she said. Then let's not waste the time you didn't volunteer. Behind Cale, someone snorted. He didn't turn around to see who it was. Before we begin, Cale said, stepping closer to her, using his size, the way he always did, filling the space between them with his presence. I want to know something. What exactly qualifies you to train my men? 7 martial arts certifications, she said. Krav Maga, Sistema, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, Filipino Kali, Judo, Combat Sambo. I've trained with operators from 4 NATO countries and 2 non-NATO allied forces. I hold a classified consulting contract with the Department of Defense. Certifications, Cale said, letting the word drip with contempt. I've got a certification in CPR. Doesn't mean I'm a doctor. A few men laughed behind him. Riley didn't react. You're right, she said. Certifications don't mean much on their own. That's why I'm here, to show you what they look like when they're applied. Cale tilted his head. Let me ask you something else. You ever been in a real fight? Not a sparring match, not a training drill, a real fight, where the other guy is trying to kill you, and the only thing between you and a body bag is what you do in the next 3 seconds. Riley looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were brown, almost black in the fog-filtered light, and they held something that Cale recognized but couldn't quite place. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror after his 3rd deployment. The look that comes after you've crossed a line you can never uncross. Yes, she said, nothing more. Cale waited for the story, the explanation, the justification. It didn't come. She just stood there, steady as stone, offering nothing and asking for nothing. It threw him off. He was used to people trying to prove themselves to him. He was used to new guys stammering through their resumes, listing their qualifications like grocery items, desperate for his approval. This woman offered her answer like a closed door, and she didn't seem to care whether he opened it or not. All right, he said, stepping back. Let's see what you've got. Delaney. Marco Delaney stepped forward from the group. He was grinning, not the kind of grin that comes from joy, but the kind that comes from anticipation. He cracked his neck, rolled his shoulders, and walked toward Riley like a man approaching a speed bag at the gym. Easy, Marco, Cale said. Controlled contact. Delaney nodded, but the grin didn't leave his face. Riley watched him approach. She didn't shift her weight. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't assume any stance that any of them recognized. You sure about this? Delaney asked her, stopping about 4 feet away. He towered over her. His shadow fell across her face like an eclipse. I'm sure, wow, she said. But I want to ask you something first. Delaney blinked. What? What's your hand-to-hand combat certification? Level 3 combatives, Army program crossover, plus 12 years of hitting people who deserved it. And in those 12 years, how many of your opponents were smaller than you? Delaney's grin faded slightly. What kind of question is that? A real one. How many of the men you fought hand-to-hand were significantly smaller than you? He didn't answer. I'm going to guess most of them, Riley said, because you're a big man, and big men tend to win with size, not technique. You close the distance, you use your weight, you overwhelm. It works when the other person doesn't know what to do with someone your size. But it's not fighting, it's physics. And physics can be redirected. The yard went dead silent. Delaney's eyes narrowed. Something changed in him. The amusement was gone. What replaced it was something older, something that lived in the part of his brain that had been trained to respond to threats. She hadn't insulted him. She'd done something worse. She diagnosed him. Whenever you're ready, Riley said. Delaney moved fast, faster than a man his size should have been able to move. He closed the 4-foot gap in a single explosive step, his right hand shooting out to grab the collar of her shirt, his left arm coming up to control her head. A classic clinch entry that he'd used 100 times before in real operations. His right hand closed on empty air. Riley had moved, out, not backward, not to the side. She dropped her center of gravity by 3 inches, pivoted on her left foot, and rotated her torso just enough to let his hand pass over her shoulder. In the same motion, she caught his extended wrist with both hands, stepped into his body rather than away from it, and used his own forward momentum to guide him past her. It happened in less than a second. One moment Delaney was attacking. The next he was stumbling forward, off balance, his wrist locked at an angle that sent a bolt of pain up his forearm. He hit the sand on one knee. Riley released his wrist and stepped back. She hadn't thrown a single strike. She hadn't used any force that wasn't already Delaney's own. Get up, she said, not cruelly, not tauntingly, just factually, like a teacher telling a student to try the math problem again. Delaney stood. His face was red, not from pain but from something deeper, from the collision between what he believed about himself and what had just happened. Again, he said through clenched teeth, are you sure again? He came at her differently this time, lower, smarter. He feinted with his left hand, then drove forward with his right shoulder, going for a takedown. It was a wrestling move, a power move, the kind of thing that had put men twice Riley's skill level on the ground. Riley didn't retreat. She dropped to one knee, caught his shoulder with her forearm, and redirected his drive into the sand beside her. As he went down, she rolled with him, ending up on top, her knee against his spine, her hand on the back of his neck. He struggled. She held him, not with strength, with position, with leverage, with the kind of body mechanics that turned a 130-pound woman into an immovable anchor on top of a 240-pound warrior. Your strength is real, she said, her voice calm and close to his ear. But strength without direction is just energy looking for somewhere to go. I gave it somewhere to go. That's the lesson. She released him and stood. Delaney rolled onto his back. He lay there in the sand for a moment, staring up at the gray sky. Then he turned his head and looked at Cale. Cale's expression had not changed. His arms were still folded, his jaw was still set, but his eyes had shifted. There was something in them now that hadn't been there before. Not respect, not yet, but attention, real focused attention, the kind he usually reserved for mission briefings and incoming fire. Who's next? Riley asked. Nobody moved. I said, who's next? Travis Webb stepped forward. He wasn't grinning. He wasn't posturing. He approached her with his hands slightly raised, his weight balanced, his eyes locked on hers. I'm not going to rush you, he said. I want to see what you do when someone actually engages properly. Riley nodded. Good. They circled each other. Webb was careful, methodical. He tested her with a jab, which she slipped. He threw a low kick, which she checked. He shot for a double-leg takedown, and she sprawled with a technique so clean it looked rehearsed. They exchanged for 90 seconds. Webb got close twice. Once he almost secured a body lock. Once he caught her arm and tried to transition to a submission. Both times she slipped out with movements so precise they seemed to violate the laws of friction. Then she ended it. A sweep that took his legs out from under him, followed by a transition to mount so fast that Webb later told his teammates he genuinely didn't understand how she'd gotten there. She pinned him. He tapped. She let go. You're better than the big guy, she said, offering Webb her hand. He took it, and she pulled him to his feet. You think before you move. That's rare. Webb nodded slowly, breathing hard. You're real, he said quietly. I'm real. Cale uncrossed his arms. He took 3 steps forward, and every man on the training yard watched him. Because when Senior Chief Petty Officer Damon Cale moved with intent, you paid attention. Voss, he said. Riley turned to face him. You've made your point with my men, but they're not the ones you need to convince. The yard went quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet before. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of embarrassment. This was the silence of anticipation. Every man there knew what was happening. Cale was stepping forward. Cale, who had killed men in 5 countries. Cale, who had once disarmed a suicide bomber with his bare hands. Cale, the man they followed into the darkest rooms on earth without hesitation. Riley looked at him. She studied his stance, the way he carried his weight, the slight forward lean that told her his instinct was always to attack. I always warn people first, she said. You already said that. I know, I'm saying it again. Cale came at her with the kind of controlled aggression that separates operators from fighters. He didn't rush. He didn't telegraph. He closed the distance with short, calculated steps. His hands up, his chin tucked, his eyes on her center mass. He threw a combination. Jab, cross, hook, each one fast, each one precise, each one delivered with the kind of power that had ended fights in rooms where the lights were off and the stakes were permanent. Riley slipped the jab. She parried the cross. And when the hook came, she did something that none of them had ever seen. She stepped into it. Not away, not to the side, into it. She moved inside the arc of his arm where the power hadn't fully loaded yet, and she placed her palm flat against his chest. Not a strike, a placement. Then she pushed. It wasn't a hard push. It was a precise push, aimed at the exact point where his weight was committed forward. At the exact moment, his balance was compromised by the rotation of the hook. Damon Cale, 6'2", 230 pounds of scarred, battle-hardened warrior, stumbled backward. His boots dragged in the sand. He caught himself, but for one full second, he had been moved by a woman who weighed 100 pounds less than him. The yard held its breath. Cale's eyes locked onto Riley's. And in that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with rank or gender or age. It was recognition. The recognition of one fighter seeing another. The recognition of someone who understands that combat is not about who hits harder, but about who sees clearer. How, Cale said, not asking, demanding. Riley didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She looked at him with the same level gaze she'd had since she stepped out of that gray sedan. Your hook is devastating, she said. Against someone who backs up, you'll land it every time. But nobody ever told you what happens when someone steps inside it, because nobody ever had the nerve to try to. Cale stared at her. His chest was rising and falling. His hands were still up. But something behind his eyes was changing, like a wall developing cracks that hadn't been there a minute ago. You didn't answer my question, he said. I asked how. Riley looked at the 18 men standing behind Cale. Every one of them was watching her. Every one of them was listening with a focus she knew they reserved for things that mattered. My father taught me, she said. He was a Marine, combat instructor. 3rd generation. He trained me from the time I was 4 years old. Not to be strong, to be precise. He used to say that strength is a loan from your body. It fades. It fails. But technique is a language. Once you learn it, you speak it forever. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. He died when I was 17, Riley said. And before he died, he made me promise one thing, that I would never stop teaching what he taught me, that I would find the best fighters in the world and I would make them better. Not by replacing what they know, but by showing them what they're missing. She looked back at Cale. You're missing something, Senior Chief. All of you are. And that's why I'm here. Cale lowered his hands. He stood there in the sand, the fog curling around him, 18 pairs of eyes on his back. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't know what to say. And somewhere behind him, standing at the back of the formation where she thought no one could see, her petty officer 3rd class Mara Solis wiped her eyes and straightened her spine. Because for the first time since she'd arrived at this base, since she'd been told every day in 100 different ways that she didn't belong. She had just watched a woman walk into the middle of the most dangerous men on the planet and make them listen. And something inside her, something that had been locked away and buried under months of doubt and silence, began to wake up. The blood on Riley's lip had barely dried when 5 of them stepped forward. It wasn't planned. There was no signal, no command from Cale. It happened the way things happen among men who have spent years reading each other's breathing patterns in pitch-black rooms. 1 moved and 4 followed. Delaney was first because Delaney was always first. Then came a compact, square-jawed operator named Hicks, the platoon's breacher, a man who opened doors with explosives for a living and had the temperament to match. Behind him was Reeves, the sniper, quiet and cold-eyed, a man who could wait for hours without blinking, and then destroy a life from 800 meters. Next came Costa, the youngest SEAL in the platoon besides Marisalis, 26 years old, and carrying something to prove to every person who had ever looked at him. And last was Brennan, the platoon medic, a man who knew every bone in the human body because he had set most of them back into place under fire. 5 men, combined weight over 1,100 pounds, combined combat experience spanning 14 deployments across 6 countries. Every single one of them had taken a life with his hands, and they were walking toward a woman who weighed 130 pounds. Cale watched from the side. He hadn't spoken since Riley put him off balance. He stood with his arms crossed, his jaw grinding slowly, his eyes tracking every movement on the yard. He told himself he was letting this happen because it would end the circus. 5 operators against 1 civilian. She'd tap out. She'd realize this wasn't a dojo in San Diego. And Warcom would get their report, and this would be over by lunch. That's what he told himself. But somewhere deeper in the part of his mind that 23 years of combat had sharpened into something that operated below conscious thought, Cale was watching because he needed to see. He needed to understand what had just happened to him. How a woman half his size had stepped inside his hook and moved him like he was standing on ice. Riley saw them coming. All 5. She didn't back up. She didn't widen her stance. She did something that Marisalis, watching from the back of the formation, would remember for the rest of her life. She breathed out, one slow exhale, and then she was still, not frozen, not tense. Still the way water is still before it moves through a crack in a dam. Still the way a loaded spring is still. All 5 at once, she said. Or are we taking turns? Delaney cracked his knuckles. You tell us. All 5. It's faster. Hicks laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like a round being chambered. Lady, I've watched you play patty cake with Marco and the senior chief. That's cute, but 5 of us. At the same time, that's not a lesson. That's a hospital visit. Riley looked at him. What's your name? Hicks. Hicks, I'm going to ask you to remember this moment. Right now, this exact second, because in about 45 seconds, you're going to be on the ground and you're going to want to understand how you got there. The answer is this moment. The moment you decided I couldn't do it. Hicks stopped laughing. Whenever you're ready, Riley said. They came at her in a loose semicircle, not all at once. They were too well trained for that. Delaney pushed forward first, same as before, looking for the clinch. Hicks circled right. Costa circled left. Reeves hung back reading, waiting for the opening. Brennan positioned himself behind her, cutting off her retreat. It was a textbook encirclement, the kind of tactical positioning they used when clearing rooms with hostile combatants inside, the kind that left no escape route, the kind that ended fights before they started. Riley let Delaney close the distance. He reached for her, and this time he was smarter about it. He didn't overextend. He kept his weight back. He grabbed for her shoulder with his left hand, a controlling grip, not an attacking one. She let him touch her. Every man on the yard saw it. She let his hand land on her shoulder, and for 1/2 second, Delaney thought he had her. His fingers closed on the fabric of her shirt, and his brain sent the signal that said, contact made, now drive. But in that 1/2 second, Riley had already moved. She trapped his hand against her shoulder, with her chin gripped his wrist with both hands, and dropped her weight straight down. Delaney's elbow locked, his shoulder torqued, and his body and all 240 pounds of it followed the only path it could to avoid a dislocated joint. He went down, face first, into the sand. Hicks was already coming. He had used Delaney's attack as cover, closing the distance on Riley's right side while she was engaged. He threw a straight, right aimed at her ribs, the kind of body shot that cracks floating ribs and drops people to their knees. Riley released Delaney's wrist and pivoted. She didn't block the punch. She redirected it, catching his forearm with her open palm and guiding it past her body. His momentum carried him forward, and she used it. She hooked her foot behind his ankle and pushed his shoulder. Simple physics. Opposing forces. Hicks went down sideways, his hip hitting the sand with a thud that sent a vibration through the ground. 3 seconds had passed. 2 men were down, and Riley hadn't thrown a single strike. Costa came next, and he came angry. He was young, and young men fight with their emotions first and their training second. He launched a flying knee aimed at her midsection, the kind of explosive technique that worked brilliantly in MMA cages and almost never worked in real combat. Riley sidestepped. The knee sailed past her. Costa landed off balance, and before he could recover, she was behind him. She wrapped her arm around his neck, not choking, controlling, and used his stumbling momentum to guide him to the ground. She held him there for 2 seconds, just long enough to make the point, and then released him. Breathe, she told him, and next time keep your feet on the ground. Costa rolled over, gasping, his face a mixture of humiliation and something that looked dangerously close to rage. Reeves had been watching. The sniper, the patient one, he hadn't moved while the others attacked. He'd been studying her, cataloging her responses, building a model in his head of how she moved, where she went, what she did when pressure came from different angles. Now he moved, and he moved differently. He didn't rush, he didn't throw. He closed the distance with short, controlled steps, his hands up in a tight guard, his weight perfectly centered. He was treating her like what she was, a legitimate threat. Riley noticed. "You learn fast," she said. "I watch," Reeves replied. They engaged in something that looked less like a fight and more like a conversation conducted through movement. Reeves probed with quick jabs. Riley deflected them. He shot for a takedown low and tight. She sprawled and caught his neck in a front headlock. He spun out. She let him. They reset, circled, engaged again. Reeves threw a combination that was technically perfect. Jab cross, low kick, level change, double leg. Riley defended every piece of it, but Reeves got close, closer than anyone else had gotten. He almost secured a body lock. His arms were around her waist for a full second before she stripped his grip and created distance. "You're good," Riley said, and she meant it. "Not good enough, apparently," Reeves has said. No, not yet." She ended it 30 seconds later, a sweep that took his lead leg followed by a hip throw that used his own defensive reaction against him. Reeves hit the sand on his back, and before he could move, Riley's knee was on his chest and her forearm was across his collarbone. He tapped. She released him, and when she offered her hand, he took it without hesitation. Brennan was the last, the medic. He'd been standing behind her the entire time, and now he was the only one left standing besides Riley. He held up both hands, palms out. "I'm good," he said. "I saw enough." "You sure? I set bones for a living. I'd rather not have mine set by someone else." A few men in the formation laughed. Nervous laughter. The kind that comes when the world you thought you understood has just been rearranged in front of your eyes. Riley turned to face the entire platoon. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't sweating. She stood there in the sand with 5 of their best operators picking themselves up around her, and she looked exactly the same as she had when she'd stepped out of that gray sedan. 41 seconds, she said. "That's how long it took. 4 men on the ground, 1 standing down, and I didn't throw a single punch." Nobody spoke. "You're thinking this is a trick," she continued. "You're thinking I got lucky, or your guys went easy on me, or this only works in a controlled environment. You're wrong on all 3 counts. What you just saw isn't luck. It's physics. It's biomechanics. It's understanding how the human body moves and using that understanding to control the outcome before the first hand is thrown." She looked at Delaney, who was sitting in the sand wiping grit from his face. "You're the strongest man on this yard. You could bench press me with 1 arm, and I put you down twice, not because I'm stronger than you, because I knew where you were going before you got there." She looked at Hicks. "You committed to a power shot, full rotation, full extension. It's devastating if it lands, but the moment you commit, you've told me everything. Your weight, your direction, your recovery path. I didn't block you. I let you beat yourself." She looked at Costa. "You fought angry. Anger is fuel, but it's dirty fuel. It makes you fast, and it makes you stupid. You jumped. In a real fight against someone who knows what they're doing, jumping means dying." She looked at Reeves. "You're the best fighter here. You watched, you adapted. You engaged with intelligence. You almost had me. The reason you didn't is that you've been trained to attack problems with force applied intelligently. I've been trained to attack problems with intelligence applied forcefully. The difference sounds small. It isn't." Travis Webb, standing in the formation, spoke up. "What about Cale?" Every head turned toward the senior chief. Cale hadn't moved. His arms were still crossed. His expression was unreadable. But Marasolas, who had spent months learning to read the moods of dangerous men as a survival skill, saw something in his posture that the others missed. His weight had shifted. Just slightly. From his heels to the balls of his feet, he was leaning forward. He was engaged. Riley looked at Cale. Senior Chief Cale is the most dangerous man on this yard, not because of his size, not because of his experience, because he spent 23 years adapting. He learns from every fight, every encounter, every failure. That's why he's still alive. That's why you follow him." She paused. "But he has a blind spot, the same blind spot every dominant fighter has. He's never had to fight from underneath. He's never had to survive against someone who has a technical advantage over him. He's always been the biggest, the baddest, the most experienced person in the room. And that's made him extraordinary. but it's also made him incomplete. Cale's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and for a long, dangerous moment the yard balanced on a knife's edge. Because Riley Voss had just done something that no one in Damon Cale's career had ever done. She had identified his weakness, out loud, in front of his men. Webb held his breath. Delaney stopped brushing off the sand. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then Cale uncrossed his arms. "You've got guts," he said. "I'll give you that." "I don't need you to give me anything, Senior Chief. I need you to listen." "I'm listening." "No, you're not. You're tolerating. There's a difference. Listening means being willing to change what you believe based on what you hear. You're not there yet, but you will be." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise, the same kind my father used to make." Cale stared at her. "Your father, the Marine. Gunnery Sergeant David Voss, 3rd Force Reconnaissance. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. He could break a man's arm in less time than it takes to blink. And he spent every night of my childhood teaching me how to do the same thing without breaking anything at all." "What happened to him?" Riley's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted, like a door opening onto a dark room. "Cancer, the kind that comes from burn pits and doesn't tell you it's there until it's too late. He fought it the same way he fought everything. Head on, no complaints, no self-pity. He died on a Tuesday morning in a VA hospital in Camp Pendleton while I held his hand and promised him I'd keep going." The yard was so quiet that the sound of waves hitting the beach 300 meters away was clearly audible. "He was the toughest man I ever knew," Riley said. "And the last thing he said to me was, 'The fight isn't about winning, Riley. It's about making sure the people you love come home.' That's why I'm here, not to humiliate you, not to prove a point, to make you better, so that the next time you walk into a room where someone is trying to kill you, you walk back out." Cale looked at her for a long time, then he turned to his platoon. "We're done for the morning," he said. 1,400 hours, everyone back here. Voss is going to run the afternoon session." He walked away without looking back. And as he did, Delaney turned to Webb with an expression that could only be described as a man who had just discovered that gravity worked differently than he'd been told his entire life. "Did that just happen?" Delaney asked. Webb nodded slowly. "Yeah, that just happened." Mara Salas watched Cale walk across the yard, and she watched Riley Voss stand alone in the sand where 5 men had fallen around her, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not admiration, not hero worship. Something more fundamental than that. Permission. Permission to believe that the thing she'd been told all her life, the thing that said smaller means weaker, means less, was a lie. She wanted to talk to Riley. She wanted to walk over and say something. Anything. But her feet wouldn't move and her voice wouldn't come. And the weight of 6 months of being the platoon's invisible woman pressed down on her shoulders like a loaded rucksack. So she stood there. She watched. And she made herself a promise that she didn't yet have the courage to keep. At 1,400 hours, they came back. All 18 of them. And for the first time, they came back quiet. No jokes, no bets, no laughter. They formed up on the training yard and they waited, and when Riley Voss walked out to meet them, not a single man looked away. She started with fundamentals, not the fundamentals they expected, not punches and kicks and takedowns. She started with breathing. "Every fight you've ever been in," she said, started with your breath. Your body runs on oxygen and oxygen runs on rhythm. When your breathing is wrong, your timing is wrong. When your timing is wrong, your technique is wrong. When your technique is wrong, you're relying on strength. And strength against someone who knows what they're doing is not enough." She paired them up. She told them to face each other, to place their hands on each other's shoulders, and to breathe. Just breathe. In rhythm with their partner. And then out of rhythm, and then back again. Delaney looked at his partner, a man named Torres, and said, "I feel like I'm at a yoga retreat." Riley heard him. "Delaney, you got put on the ground twice today by someone half your size. If yoga is what fixes that, you'll do yoga until your chakras glow in the dark." Torres burst out laughing. Delaney's face went red, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Just barely. Just enough. She moved through the pairs, adjusting stances, correcting grips, watching how each man moved and cataloging the information like a mechanic diagnosing an engine by the sound of its idle. When she reached Mara Solas, she stopped. Mara was paired with Costa, the young operator who had thrown the flying knee. He was standing in front of her, with his hands on her shoulders, barely touching, as if he was afraid she might break, or as if he didn't think she was worth full contact. Riley looked at Costa. "Press harder." "What? You're holding her like she's made of glass. She's not. Press harder." Costa increased the pressure. Mara's feet were shifted, but she held her ground. Good, Riley said. Then she looked at Mara, really looked at her, not past her, not through her, at her. What's your name? Solace, Petty Officer 3rd Class. Mara. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. How long have you been with this platoon? 6 months. And in 6 months, how many times has someone here trained with you at full intensity? Mara didn't answer. She didn't have to. The answer was written in the way Costa was barely touching her shoulders. The answer was written in the 6 feet of space every man in the platoon kept between himself and her during drills. The answer was written in 6 months of being present, but never included. Riley turned to Costa. Full pressure. Now. Costa hesitated. He looked past Riley toward where Cale was standing, watching from the side. Don't look at him, Riley said. Look at her. She's your partner. She's your teammate. And if you can't train with her the same way you train with Delaney, then you're failing her, you're failing yourself, and you're failing every operator who might stand next to her in a stack someday. Costa's jaw tightened. Then he pressed. Full weight, full force, the same pressure he'd give any man in the platoon. Mara stumbled. She caught herself. Her face flushed. Her arms shook, but she didn't go down. She planted her feet, she adjusted her base, and she pushed back. Riley watched her, and something crossed her face that only Mara saw. A recognition, a knowing. The look of a woman who had once stood exactly where Mara was standing, surrounded by men who didn't believe in her, holding ground that nobody thought she could hold. Again, Riley said. They went again, and by the 4th time, Mara wasn't stumbling anymore. Cale watched it all from the edge of the yard. He watched Riley move through his platoon like a surgeon through an operating room, precise, efficient, missing nothing. He watched his men, his warriors, his brothers in arms, lean in when she spoke. He watched the resistance drain from their postures 1 degree at a time, like armor being removed piece by piece. And he felt something he hadn't felt in years, something that scared him more than any enemy he'd ever faced. Doubt. Not doubt about Riley, doubt about himself, about whether the things he'd built his entire career on strength, aggression, dominance were as solid as he'd always believed, about whether the foundation he'd been standing on for 23 years had cracks he'd never bothered to look for. He pulled out his phone and called Captain Morrow. Morrow answered on the 2nd ring. How did it go? Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she put 5 of my guys on the ground in 41 seconds. Silence on the other end. And she put me off balance with an open palm. More silence. Who is she, Captain, really? Who the hell is this woman? Morrow's voice was careful when he answered. She's exactly who the file says she is, Damon. The question isn't who she is. The question is whether you're smart enough to let her do her job. Cale hung up without answering. He put the phone back in his pocket and looked across the yard where Riley Voss was teaching Mara Solis how to redirect a force 3 times her own, and Mara Solis was doing it, and the men around them were watching with the kind of attention that borders on reverence. And Damon Cale, Senior Chief Petty Officer, 23 years of service, 5 combat deployments, a Bronze Star, and a body full of scars, stood at the edge of his own training yard and realized that he was afraid. Not of Riley Voss, not of what she could do with her hands. He was afraid of what she could do to the story he'd told himself about who he was. The story that said he was the best. The story that said skill and experience and aggression were enough. The story that had kept him alive, but might also have been keeping him from becoming something more. He watched Mara push back against Costa and hold her ground, and he thought about the 23 years of men he'd trained and the ones who hadn't come home, and he wondered for the first time whether things could have been different if someone like Riley Voss had walked onto his yard sooner. 3 days in, and Damon Cale still hadn't asked Riley a single question during training. He watched. He stood at the edge of the yard, every session, arms crossed, jaw set, observing everything she did with the focus of a man studying an enemy's position before a raid. He let her run the drills. He let her pair up his men. He let her walk through the platoon, correcting stances and adjusting grips. But he never engaged, never stepped onto the sand, never once opened his mouth to ask her to explain what she was teaching or why. Riley noticed. She noticed everything. But she didn't push. Not yet. It was Webb who broke first. Wednesday morning, 06:30, before the rest of the platoon arrived. Webb found Riley stretching near the pull-up bars alone, her movements slow and deliberate like a cat warming its joints. Can I ask you something, he said. You already are. Webb smiled slightly. The thing you did with Reeves, the hip throw at the end, he had you in a body lock, full grip, both arms around your waist. I've seen him hold that grip on men 40 pounds heavier than him, and they couldn't break it. How did you strip it? Riley stopped stretching. She looked at Webb with something close to appreciation. You saw the grip strip. I saw the result. I didn't see the mechanics. That's because the mechanic happened before the grip. Reeves locked his hands behind my back. Standard body lock. Fingers interlaced. Very strong. Almost impossible to break with raw force. So how? I didn't break it. I changed the angle. When someone locks their hands behind you, their grip strength is at maximum when your body is square to theirs. Chest to chest. Hips aligned. That's the position of maximum control. So I didn't try to pull away. I rotated. 45 degrees. Just enough to change the alignment of his wrists. When your wrists aren't aligned with your fingers, your grip loses about 60% of its strength. I didn't strip his hands. I made his hands strip themselves. Webb stared at her. 60%. Roughly, my father measured it. He was obsessive about numbers. He used to say that fighting isn't art, it's engineering. Art is subjective, engineering is math, and math doesn't care how big you are. Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father sounds like he was something else." He was. Can I ask what unit he was with? You said 3rd Force Recon. That's right. What years? Riley looked at him. Her expression shifted, just slightly, just enough for Webb to notice. Why puttano? Because I know a guy, retired now. He was 3rd Force Recon, early 2000s. Name's Patterson. Jim Patterson. He might have known your dad. Something moved behind Riley's eyes, a flicker. Not pain exactly, but the shadow of it. The kind of shadow that lives in a room where the lights have been off for a long time. My father didn't talk much about the men he served with, she said. After he got sick, he stopped talking about the Corps altogether. I think it hurt too much. Not the memories, the fact that he was dying in a hospital bed instead of on his feet. Webb nodded slowly. He understood that. Every operator understood that. The fear wasn't death. The fear was dying wrong, dying slowly, dying in a place with fluorescent lights and beeping machines instead of under an open sky with a rifle in your hands. I'll look Patterson up, Webb said. Maybe he has stories your dad never told you. Riley didn't respond right away. She turned back to the pull-up bars, wrapped her hands around the cold steel and pulled herself up. Smooth, controlled, no kipping, no swinging. Pure strength delivered through perfect form. Maybe, she said on the way down. But stories don't change anything. Training does. By Thursday, the platoon had started to split. Not openly, not in any way that showed up on duty rosters or incident reports. The split was invisible, carried in glances and silences, and the way men grouped themselves during breaks. On one side were the operators who had begun to lean into Riley's teaching. Webb, Reeves, Brennan, Torres, men who had felt something shift during those first sessions and were curious enough, humble enough to follow where it led. They asked questions, they stayed late. They practiced the grip strips and the angle changes and the breathing patterns on their own time. On the other side were the holdouts. Delaney, Hicks, Costa, and 4 or 5 others who hadn't been publicly embarrassed by Riley but who felt the ground shifting beneath them and didn't like it. They trained when ordered. They participated in drills. But their compliance was mechanical hollow, the kind of obedience that follows the letter of a command while violating its spirit. And in the middle, occupying a space that belonged to neither group, was Cale. Thursday afternoon, 14:30. Riley ran a drill she called the mirror. 2 operators faced each other. One attacked. The other had to defend using only redirection. No strikes, no blocks, only movement and angle changes. The goal was to make the attacker defeat himself using his own force. Delaney hated it. "This is garbage," he said to Hicks during a water break loud enough for half the platoon to hear. "We're not learning how to fight, we're learning how to dance. Next thing you know, she'll have us holding hands and singing camp songs." Hicks grunted agreement. 2 days ago, she had us doing breathing exercises. Breathing exercises. I didn't survive Fallujah by breathing correctly. I survived by putting rounds downrange and stomping on the guy who was trying to kill me. Exactly, this technique stuff, it works in a gym. It works when everybody agrees to the rules. Put me in a room with 3 insurgents and an AK and tell me to redirect their energy. See how that works out? Costa, standing nearby, nodded. She's good at what she does, I'll admit that. But what she does isn't what we do. We're not martial artists. We're war fighters. There's a difference. A big difference, Delaney said. And Cale knows it. He's letting this play out because the orders say he has to. But watch, by Friday he'll shut it down. They were wrong about that, but they didn't know it yet. Across the yard, Mara Salas was paired with Reeves for the mirror drill, and something was happening that neither of them expected. Mara attacked. Reeves defended. She threw a right cross, and Reeves redirected it the way Riley had taught, using her own momentum to move her off her line. Mara stumbled, recovered, and came again. Left hook. Reeves caught her arm, turned his hips, and she spun past him. Better, Reeves said, but you're telegraphing with your shoulder. I can see the hook coming before you throw it. Mara reset. She stared at Reeves, and something hardened in her expression. Not anger, determination. The quiet, stubborn kind that doesn't announce itself. She attacked again. This time she didn't telegraph. She threw the hook without loading her shoulder the way Riley had demonstrated that morning. Reeves reached for the redirect and missed. Mara's fist stopped an inch from his jaw. Reeves blinked. Then he grinned. It was the first genuine grin Mara had seen from any member of the platoon directed at her in 6 months. There it is, he said. Riley appeared beside them. She'd been watching from 3 pairs away, and she'd crossed the distance without either of them hearing her move. Do it again, Riley told Mara. Mara did it again. Clean, fast, no telegraph. Again, faster this time, sharper. What did you change? Riley asked. I stopped thinking about the punch and started thinking about where it needed to be. Riley looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Your father in the military? Mara shook her head. No, single mom, waitress in Oklahoma City. I joined because I wanted to be something that nobody in my family had ever been. And are you? Mara didn't answer. The question hung between them like a held breath. You will be, Riley said, but not if you keep making yourself small. I've watched you for 3 days. You stand in the back. You speak quietly. You take up as little space as possible. You're surviving this platoon, Mara. You're not living in it. Mara's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. She held Riley's gaze with something that felt like the first real act of courage she'd committed since arriving at Coronado. I don't know how to be anything else here, Mara said. They don't want me. That's not your problem. Your problem is that you've started to agree with them. The words landed like a slap, not cruel, accurate. The kind of truth that hurts because it's true and because the person saying it has no reason to lie. Riley put her hand on Mara's shoulder. Not the way the men touched each other, the rough, brotherly contact of teammates. She touched her the way a teacher touches a student who is standing at the edge of a breakthrough and doesn't know it yet. You threw that hook without telegraphing. You know what that means? It means your body already knows how to do what your mind is afraid to try. Trust it. Your body is ahead of your brain. Let it lead. Mara nodded. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, quickly hoping nobody saw. Reeves saw. He didn't say anything, but he repositioned himself, slightly angling his body so that his back was to the rest of the platoon, giving her a moment of privacy without being asked. It was a small thing. The kind of thing that doesn't show up in after-action reports or performance evaluations. But Mara felt it, and she would remember it long after she'd forgotten the specifics of the drill. Friday morning, 0700, 4 days into Riley's training, Cale called a platoon meeting in the briefing room before the day's session. He stood at the front. No notes, no slides, just Cale and his voice in the weight of 23 years. I'm going to say something, and I'm only going to say it once, he began. I've heard the talk. I know some of you think this training is a waste of time. I know some of you think Voss is a circus act. I know some of you think I'm going to pull the plug and send her home. He paused. His eyes moved across the room, stopping on Delaney, then Hicks, then Costa. I'm not. The room went still. I watched her put 5 of you on the ground in 41 seconds. I felt her put me off balance with an open palm. I've spent 4 days watching her teach things I've never seen in 23 years of training. And I've spent 4 nights lying awake asking myself a question I don't like asking. He paused again. Longer this time. The kind of pause that makes men lean forward. The question is whether I've been good enough. Not whether I've been tough enough. Not whether I've been brave enough. Whether I've been good enough. Whether the way I've been training you, the way I've been fighting, the way I've been leading has been the best it could be or just the best I knew how to do. And I don't like the answer. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The answer is I don't know. And that scares me more than any firefight I've ever been in. Because in a firefight, I know what to do. But this is different. This is someone showing me that the thing I've built my life on might have holes in it. And the hardest thing in the world isn't admitting you're wrong. It's admitting you might not have been as right as you thought. Delaney opened his mouth. Cale cut him off with a look. I'm not done. Starting today, I'm participating in the training fully, not watching from the side, not supervising, participating. And every man in this room is going to do the same. Not because the orders say so, because I'm saying so. And if anyone has a problem with that, you can come see me privately and we'll discuss it. But I promise you, that discussion will be short. He let the silence settle. Then he said, dismissed. Training yard in 30 minutes. The room emptied, but not the way it usually did, with noise and movement and the casual energy of men going about routine. They filed out quietly like men leaving a church after hearing something they needed time to process. Webb caught up with Cale in the hallway. Senior Chief. What? That took guts. Cale didn't look at him. He kept walking. It took 4 days too long. At 07:30, Riley stood on the training yard and watched Damon Cale walk out of the building, cross the sand, and take a position in the formation. Not at the edge, not supervising, in the formation, between Torres and Webb, standing shoulder to shoulder with his men like a private on his first day. She didn't comment on it. She didn't acknowledge it. She just began the session. But Webb saw her hands. Just for a second, when Cale took his position, Riley's hands trembled. Not from fear, not from cold, from the kind of emotion that comes when you've been carrying a weight for a long time and someone finally steps underneath it to help. It lasted less than a second. Then her hands were steady again, and her voice was calm, and she was teaching. Today, we work on trust, she said. Everything I've shown you so far, the redirections, the angles, the breathing, none of it matters if you can't trust the person next to you. Technique without trust is a solo act, and solo acts die in combat. She paired them differently, not by size or rank, by opposition. She put Delaney with Mara, Hicks with Webb, Costa with Reeves, the men who resisted with the ones who had opened up, the biggest with the smallest. Delaney looked down at Mara, Mara looked up at Delaney, and the distance between them measured not in inches, but in assumptions and prejudice, and 6 months of unspoken contempt felt like a canyon. The drill is simple, Riley said. One of you falls backward, the other catches, then you switch. Trust falls, Delaney said. Are you serious? Fall backward, Delaney, now. I weigh 240. She weighs, 130? She can't catch me. She doesn't have to catch you. She has to redirect your weight. The same principle I used on you Monday. Your job is to fall. Her job is to control where you land. This isn't about strength. It's about positioning. Delaney stared at Riley. Then he looked at Mara. If I break her, that's on you. You won't break her. Fall. Delaney turned his back to Mara. He stood rigid for a moment, every muscle in his 240-pound frame locked tight. Then he let go. He fell backward, 240 pounds of muscle and bone, dropping toward a woman who weighed nearly half what he did. Mara caught his shoulders. Her knees buckled. Her boots slid in the sand, but she didn't collapse. She redirected his weight to the side, guiding his fall the way Riley had taught, using angle instead of force. Delaney hit the sand on his hip, controlled safe, and not on top of Mara. He lay there for a second. Then he looked up at her. Huh, he said. That was all. Just, huh. But Mara heard a lifetime of recalculation in that single syllable. The sound of a man's certainty developing its first crack. Switch, Riley said. Mara turned her back to Delaney. She was shaking. Not from the effort, from what she was about to do. She was about to fall backward into the arms of a man who had spent 6 months for pretending she didn't exist. She closed her eyes. She thought about what Riley had said. Trust your body. Your body is ahead of your brain. Let it lead. She fell. Delaney caught her, not roughly, not carelessly. He caught her the way Riley had described, with positioning and control, guiding her weight to the side so she landed softly in the sand. 8 days into Riley's training. Cale's phone buzzed on the nightstand, and he was awake before the first vibration ended. 23 years of deployments had rewired his nervous system so completely that the difference between deep sleep and full consciousness was less than a heartbeat. Cale, Senior Chief, this is Lieutenant Commander Aldrich, Warcom Operations Desk. We have a situation. Cale was already on his feet, pulling on his pants with one hand, holding the phone with the other. Go ahead. We've received intelligence on a high-value target operating out of a compound in a location I can't disclose on this line. The window is 72 hours. Your platoon has been selected for the direct action component of the mission. Full briefing at 0500 at the Operations Center. Wheels up in 36 hours. Cale stopped moving. My platoon is in the middle of a training evolution. The training evolution is suspended effective immediately. This is a real-world tasking, Senior Chief. Priority 1. Understood. The line went dead. Cale stood in his quarters, his shirt half-buttoned, his boots untied, and his mind already running through the checklist. Gear, personnel, medical readiness, communications, contingency planning. 100 variables that needed to be locked down in 36 hours. But one thought pushed through all of it, sharp and unwanted, like a splinter under his skin. 8 days. They'd had 8 days with Riley. 8 days of training that had started to change things in ways he was only beginning to understand. And now it was over. The real world didn't wait for transformation. The real world called at 3 in the morning and gave you 36 hours. He called Webb first, then Delaney, then the rest of the platoon, one by one, the phone tree branching outward through the dark morning. By 0400, every man and woman in the platoon had been notified. At 0430, Cale stood outside the operations center and found Riley Voss waiting for him. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, wearing the same olive green t-shirt and cargo pants she'd worn every day since she arrived. She looked like she hadn't slept, or like she didn't need to. "How did you know?" Cale asked. "Webb texted me." Webb doesn't have the authority to brief civilians on operational tasking. "He didn't brief me. He told me the training was suspended. I filled in the rest." Cale stared at her. "You need to leave the base. This is an active operation now. No civilian contractors in the planning space." "I know. I'm not here for the planning. I'm here for you. For me. You've had 8 days, Cale. 8 days to learn something new. And now you're about to take your men into a situation where everything they've learned will either save their lives or be forgotten the moment the adrenaline hits. Which one it is depends on you." Cale stepped closer to her. His voice dropped low the way it did when he was giving orders he expected to be followed without question. "I've been doing this for 2 decades. I don't need a pep talk from a 22-year-old civilian on the morning of a real-world mission." "You're right. You don't need a pep talk. You need to hear one thing and then I'll go." "What?" "Don't go back to who you were. You've spent 8 days becoming something better. Faster, smarter, more adaptable. I've watched it happen. Your men have watched it happen. If you walk into that briefing room and put on the old armor because it feels safer, you'll undo everything. Every drill, every lesson, every crack in the wall that let the light in." Cale's jaw tightened. His hands balled into fists at his sides. Not because he was angry, because she was right and he knew it, and knowing it made him feel exposed in a way that 23 years of body armor had never been able to prevent. "Your father," Cale said, "the Marine, did he ever have this conversation with anyone?" Every time, before every deployment, he'd tell his men the same thing. Don't go back. The old way feels safe because it's familiar. But familiar isn't the same as effective. And in combat, the difference between familiar and effective is the difference between coming home and not coming home. Cale looked at her for a long time. Then he did something that surprised both of them. He extended his hand. Riley took it. They shook once, firm, brief. The handshake of two people who understood each other in a way that didn't require explanation. "Take care of yourself, Voss. Take care of them, Cale." He turned and walked into the operations center. Riley watched him go. Then she turned and walked across the parking lot toward her gray sedan, alone in the dark with the weight of everything she'd taught and everything she couldn't control sitting heavy on her shoulders. She was halfway to her car when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast, light, not the heavy bootfalls of the operators she'd been training. "Riley," she turned. Mara Solis was standing 10 feet away, still in her PT clothes, her hair pulled back, her face tight with something that looked like fear and determination wrestling each other in real time. "You're leaving," Mara said. It wasn't a question. "The training's suspended. You have a mission." "I know. That's why I need to talk to you. Right now, before everything starts." Riley stopped walking. She turned fully to face Mara and gave her the same level gaze she'd given every person she'd encountered at this base. No judgment, no pity, just attention. "Talk," Riley said. Mara's voice cracked on the first word, and she hated herself for it. "I'm scared. Of the mission, of everything. The mission, the men, the part where we stack up on a door and go through it, and there are people on the other side who want to kill us. I've trained for it. I've qualified for it. I've passed every test, but I've never done it for real. And every time I close my eyes, I see myself freezing, standing in the fatal funnel while the rest of the team moves and I just stand there, and someone dies because I couldn't move my feet." Riley walked back to her. She didn't rush. She covered the distance with the same measured stride she'd used on the first day, the stride that said, "I have been where you are, and I know the way through." "Look at me," Riley said. Mara looked at her. "You threw a hook at Reeves without telegraphing on your third day. You caught Delaney when he fell backward, and he outweighs you by 110 pounds. You pushed back against Costa at full pressure, and you didn't break. You've done things this week that half the men in your platoon couldn't do on their first try. That's training. This is real. Training is real. That's the whole point. Every rep, every drill, every time you fell in the sand and got back up, your body was recording it. Muscle memory doesn't know the difference between a training yard and a kill house. When the door opens and the adrenaline hits, your conscious mind is going to shut down. It does that for everyone, even Kale, even Delaney. The difference between freezing and moving isn't courage, Mara. It's preparation. And you were prepared. Mara's eyes filled. She blinked hard once and the tears didn't fall. How do you know? Because I've seen you move. And the way you move tells me everything I need to know about what you'll do when it matters. What if you're wrong? Riley put both hands on Mara's shoulders. She held her there firm and steady, the way her father had held her the morning she left for her first overseas contract when she was 19 years old and terrified and trying not to show it. I'm not wrong, Riley said. And here's how I know. Because the person who freezes is the person who doesn't know they're afraid. They think courage means the absence of fear, so when the fear shows up, they don't recognize it and it paralyzes them. You already know you're afraid. You just told me. That means when the fear comes, and it will come, you'll recognize it. And recognizing it is the first step to moving through it. Mara nodded. She wiped her eyes again harder this time. Will you be here when we get back? Riley hesitated, just for a moment. Just long enough for Mara to see that the woman who had dismantled 5 Navy SEALs in 41 seconds was capable of uncertainty too. I'll be here, Riley said. Now go. Your team needs you. Mara straightened up. She squared her shoulders the way Riley had taught her during the trust drills, feet apart, weight-centered, spine-aligned. She looked at Riley one more time, and in that look was something that hadn't been there 8 days ago. Something that had been built one drill at a time, one correction at a time, one fall, and one catch at a time. Then she turned and ran toward the operations center. Riley watched her go and felt her father's voice in her chest, distant and clear, saying the thing he always said when she was young and scared and about to step into something bigger than herself. Fear is just your body telling you to pay attention, Riley. Listen to it, then do the thing anyway. The briefing lasted 4 hours. Captain Morrow ran the operational overview. Cale ran the tactical planning. The target was a mid-level arms dealer operating out of a fortified residential compound in an undisclosed location. A man who had supplied weapons to 3 separate militant networks and whose capture would disrupt supply chains across an entire region. The mission was a direct action raid. 2 elements, Alpha and Bravo. Alpha would breach the main entrance and clear the ground floor. Bravo would breach the secondary entrance and clear the upper levels. Cale would lead Alpha. Webb would lead Bravo. During the briefing, Cale did something he'd never done before. He changed the standard operating procedure for close quarters engagement. When we enter rooms, he said, standing at the front with a floor plan projected behind him, we're going to use angled entries instead of standard dynamic. The first man through the door goes 45 degrees off the threshold instead of straight through the fatal funnel. Second man mirrors. This reduces exposure time by roughly half a second. Delaney frowned. We've always done standard dynamic. Why change it now? Cale looked at him. Because standard dynamic relies on speed and aggression to overwhelm the threat. Angled entry relies on positioning and timing. It's slower to execute, but harder to counter. And it keeps our guys alive longer in the first 2 seconds of a room entry, which is where 80% of casualties happen. Where'd you learn angled entry? Hicks asked from the back row. Cale paused. Every man in the room knew the answer. He could feel them waiting for him to say it. Voss, he said. She demonstrated the principle during the redirection drills. The same concept applies to room clearing. Don't go where the threat expects you. Go where it doesn't. The room was quiet, not the skeptical quiet of a week ago, a different kind of quiet. The quiet of men processing the fact that their leader had just credited a civilian woman with changing the way they were going to fight. Delaney leaned back in his chair. He didn't argue. He didn't crack a joke. He just nodded once and wrote something in his notebook. 36 hours later, they were on a transport aircraft flying through the night toward a place that would exist only in classified documents and the memories of the people who survived it. Mara sat in the rear of the aircraft, her gear packed tight, her rifle across her lap, her hands shaking despite every effort to make them stop. She was assigned to Bravo element under Webb. Her role was rear security during the breach last through the door, responsible for covering the team's 6 as they moved through the upper levels. Webb sat down next to her. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there present, the way you sit next to someone who needs to know they're not alone. First time, he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Yeah, mine too once. Were you scared? Webb looked at her. He could have lied. He could have given her the tough guy answer, the one that said SEALs don't get scared, the one that preserved the mythology. But something Riley had said during the trust drills had stuck with him. The most dangerous lie you can tell is the one that makes someone feel alone in their fear. Terrified, Webb said. I threw up in my helmet before we hit the ground. Cale pretended he didn't see it. We never talked about it, but I know he saw. Mara almost smiled. What happened? We breached. The door went down. In the second I crossed the threshold, the fear was still there, but it wasn't in charge anymore. My training was in charge. My body knew what to do even when my brain was screaming at me to run. Riley said the same thing. Riley was right about a lot of things. Mara gripped her rifle tighter. Webb, if I freeze in there, what do you do? Webb turned to face her fully. His expression was serious but not hard. Not the expression of a leader about to deliver a threat. The expression of a teammate about to deliver a truth. You won't freeze. But if you do, I'll be right behind you and I'll move you forward. That's what we do. We move each other forward. Nobody gets left standing in the door. Nobody gets left behind. Mara nodded. She closed her eyes and did the breathing exercise Riley had taught them on the second day. In through the nose, 4 counts. Hold, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. She felt her heart rate slow. She felt her hands steady. Not completely, but enough. Across the aircraft, Cale sat alone. He was running the mission plan through his head for the 40th time, checking every angle, every contingency, every possible point of failure. His phone was off. His world had shrunk to the size of this aircraft and the mission that waited at the other end. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in the place where the things that matter most live, he heard Riley's voice. Don't go back to who you were. The compound materialized in their night vision optics at 02:15 local time. The helicopters came in low and fast, the rotors beating the air into submission. Alpha element hit the ground first. Cale was out the door before the skids touched dirt, his rifle up his boots, driving into the hard-packed earth. Alpha move, he said into his radio. His voice was calm, not the calm of a man who wasn't afraid, the calm of a man who had acknowledged his fear and put it in its place. They stacked on the main entrance. 4 men, Cale at the 1 position, Delaney at 2, Torres at 3, Hicks at 4. The breaching charge was set. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The door blew inward, and Cale went through it at 45 degrees. Not straight, not the way he'd done it for 23 years. 45 degrees off the threshold, angled right, his rifle sweeping the corner of the room before anyone inside could process the breach. It was Riley's principle, the same principle she'd used when she stepped inside his hook. Don't go where the threat expects you. Go where it doesn't. The first room was empty. The second room was not. 2 men with AK-47s rising from chairs, their weapons coming up. Cale engaged the first. Delaney engaged the second. Both threats neutralized in under 2 seconds. Clean, efficient, no wasted movement, no wasted rounds. Room clear, Cale said. They moved to the third room. The door was closed. Cale pressed his back against the wall beside it and listened. He could hear movement inside. Multiple footsteps. The metallic sound of a weapon being charged. Flash and clear, he said. Torres pulled a flashbang from his vest, pulled the pin, and rolled it under the door gap. The bang shook the walls. Cale went through the door 45 degrees left side this time. 2 more targets, disoriented. One trying to raise his weapon. Cale closed the distance in 2 steps and did something he had never done before in a real-world operation. He redirected. The man's rifle was coming up. In 23 years of operating, Cale would have shot him. Point blank. Center mass. No hesitation. But the man was still disoriented from the flashbang, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. In Cale's training, the new training, the training that was 8 days old and shouldn't have been strong enough to override 2 decades of instinct, took over. He caught the rifle barrel with his left hand, pushed it to the side, and drove his right forearm into the man's chest. The same placement Riley had used on him. Same angle. Same point of contact. The man went backward, hit the wall, and dropped. Cale kicked the rifle away and zip-tied his hands before he could recover. Alive. The man was alive. And the intelligence he could provide was worth more than a bullet. Ground floor clear, Cale radioed. 2 enemy KIA, 1 detained, moving to link up with Bravo. Upstairs, Webb's element had breached 30 seconds after Alpha. Webb went through the secondary entrance at 45 degrees, mirroring Cale's approach. Reeves was at the 2 position, Brennan at 3, and Marisalis was at 4. Rear security, last through the door. The upper level was a narrow hallway with 3 rooms. Webb took the first, Reeves took the second. Both clear. The third door was at the end of the hallway, and as they approached it, they heard something that changed everything. A woman's voice, screaming, in a language none of them spoke, and then a child's voice, crying. Webb held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Possible non-combatants, Webb said into the radio, third room upper level, adjusting approach. Copy, Cale replied from downstairs. Your call, Webb. Webb turned to Mara. Solis, you're on me. We go in together. If there are non-combatants inside, we need a controlled entry. No flash, no bang, slow and deliberate. Mara's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. This was it. Not a drill, not a trust fall, not a breathing exercise on a training yard in California. This was a door with unknown threats behind it and a child crying on the other side. She thought about Riley. She thought about the hook she'd thrown without telegraphing. She thought about catching Delaney when he fell. She thought about the words that had been repeated to her so many times they had become a heartbeat. Trust your body. Your body is ahead of your brain. Let it lead. Ready, Mara said. Webb opened the door. Slow, controlled. Inside, a woman was huddled in the corner with a child in her arms. A girl maybe 4 years old with wide, terrified eyes and tears streaming down her face. And standing between them and the door was a man with a pistol, his hands shaking, his eyes wild, pointing the weapon not at Webb, not at Mara, but at the woman and child behind him. Drop the weapon, Webb commanded in Arabic. The man screamed something back. His hand was shaking so badly the pistol was vibrating. He wasn't a fighter. He was a terrified human being who had grabbed a gun when the explosion started and didn't know what to do with it. He's going to shoot them, Mara whispered. Hold position, Webb said. But Mara saw what Webb couldn't see from his angle. The man's trigger finger was tightening. Not deliberately, involuntarily. The spasm of a hand gripping too hard under too much stress. He was going to fire the weapon not because he chose to, but because his body was going to betray him. Mara moved. She didn't think about it. She didn't plan it. Her body moved the way Riley had told her it would, ahead of her brain faster than conscious thought. Driven by 8 days of training that had written itself into her muscles and her reflexes and the part of her nervous system that operates below the level of decision. She stepped past Webb. She closed the distance to the man in 3 steps. She caught the pistol with her left hand, pushing it toward the ceiling, and with her right hand she applied pressure to his wrist, the same angle change Riley had taught her, the one that reduces grip strength by 60%. The pistol came free. The man collapsed to his knees, and Mara stood over him, holding his weapon, breathing hard, her hands steady for the first time since she'd boarded the aircraft. Webb stared at her. His mouth was open. He closed it. Then he keyed his radio. Upper level clear. 1 detained. 2 non-combatants secured. No casualties. He paused. Then he added something that wasn't standard radio protocol, but that every man on the frequency needed to hear. Solis just saved 2 lives. The radio was silent for 3 seconds. Then Cale's voice came through low and rough and carrying something that sounded like the first syllable of a word he'd never learned to say. Copy that. The extraction took 20 minutes. The helicopters came back in, the team loaded up the compound, disappeared behind them in the dark. The target, the arms dealer, was found hiding in a basement compartment that Alpha Element discovered during their sweep. He was zip-tied, hooded, and placed on the aircraft without resistance. On the flight back, nobody spoke for a long time. The silence of men processing what they'd done, what they'd seen, what they'd become, in the space between the first breach and the last extraction. Delaney sat across from Mara. He looked at her for a long time. Then he leaned forward and said something that no one else on the aircraft heard. You didn't freeze. Mara looked at him. Her face was streaked with dust and sweat and the residue of a flashbang that had gone off 2 rooms away. She looked 10 years older than she had 8 days ago. She looked like a warrior. No, she said. I didn't. Delaney nodded. Then he did something that Mara would carry with her for the rest of her career, through every deployment, every mission, every moment when the doubt crept back and tried to tell her she didn't belong. He extended his fist. Mara bumped it. And in the back of the aircraft, Damon Cale sat alone, his head leaned against the fuselage, his eyes closed, his mind replaying the moment when he caught the rifle barrel and redirected instead of fired. And the man had lived, and the intelligence had been preserved, and the mission had succeeded, not because of who he'd been for 23 years, but because of who he'd become in 8 days. He thought about Riley Voss. He thought about a Marine named David Voss who died in a VA hospital holding his daughter's hand. He thought about the promise that daughter had made to find the best fighters in the world and make them better. And sitting in the dark somewhere over an ocean, flying home from a mission that had changed everything. Damon Cale finally understood what Riley had been trying to tell him from the very first moment she'd stepped onto his training yard. The fight isn't about winning. It's about making sure the people you love come home. Every single one of them was coming home. They landed at Coronado at 0947 on a Sunday morning, and Riley Voss was standing on the tarmac. Cale saw her first. He was the first off the helicopter the way he was always first, and he stopped 3 steps from the aircraft when he spotted her. She was standing 50 meters away, arms at her sides, that same olive green t-shirt, those same cargo pants, those same boots that had crossed training yards on 4 continents. She wasn't waving. She wasn't smiling. She was just there, present, the way she'd been present from the moment she'd arrived. The platoon filed off the helicopter behind Cale, 18 operators exhausted, dusty, carrying the weight of a mission that had gone right in ways none of them had expected. They saw Riley. One by one, they stopped walking. Nobody spoke. It was Delaney who broke the silence. He dropped his gear bag on the tarmac, walked straight toward Riley, and stopped 2 feet in front of her. He stood there, this massive man with sand still in his beard and gunpowder residue on his hands, and he looked at her the way you look at someone who saved your life without being in the room. "You were right," he said. "About what? All of it." Then Marco Delaney, who had once told her she was a circus act, who had laughed when Cale called her a babysitter, who had bet $20 she wouldn't last 5 minutes, did something that no one on that tarmac would ever forget. He saluted her. Not the sloppy, casual salute that men give each other as a greeting. A real salute, crisp, formal. The kind that carries the full weight of military respect. The kind that a senior enlisted operator gives to someone he considers worthy of it. Riley didn't return the salute. She couldn't. She was a civilian. But she held his gaze and she nodded. And that nod carried everything that a salute would have carried, and more. Behind Delaney, one by one, the rest of the platoon dropped their gear. Hicks, Costa, Torres, Brennan, Reeves. Every man who had stood on that training yard 8 days ago and dismissed her, every man who had doubted her, every man who had walked through a door on a real-world mission, using the techniques she taught them and come home alive because of it. They formed a line behind Delaney and they saluted. Riley's hands trembled. The same tremor Webb had seen when Cale first stepped into formation. The tremor that came not from weakness, but from the kind of emotion that overwhelms the body's ability to contain it. She pressed her lips together. She breathed. She held. Then Webb stepped forward. He didn't salute. He walked up to Riley and said, "I found Patterson." Riley blinked. "What?" "Jim Patterson, 3rd Force Recon. The guy I mentioned who might have known your dad. I made some calls from the aircraft on the satellite phone. It took 3 connections, but I got him." Riley's composure cracked, just a fraction. Just enough to show the person underneath the technique and the stillness and the controlled exterior she'd built over years of walking into rooms where no one believed in her. "You called him from the aircraft during a mission." "After the mission, during the flight back. I figured you'd want to know." "Know what?" Webb reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He'd written something on it in pencil, the handwriting rough and uneven from the vibration of the helicopter. "Patterson served with your father from 2001 to 2004. 3 deployments together. He said your dad was the best hand-to-hand instructor he'd ever seen. He said the Marines in their unit used to call him the professor because he treated every fight like a lecture and every opponent like a student." Riley took the paper. Her hands were shaking openly now, and she didn't try to hide it. "He said one more thing," Webb continued. "He said your dad talked about you constantly. Every deployment, every patrol, every downtime they had. He said David Voss told anyone who would listen that his daughter was going to be better than him someday. That she was going to go places he couldn't go and teach people he couldn't reach." Riley closed her eyes. The tears came silently running down her cheeks in 2 clean lines, and she let them come. She didn't wipe them. She didn't turn away. She stood on that tarmac in front of 18 of the most dangerous people on Earth, and she cried openly, without shame, without apology. "Patterson wants to talk to you," Webb said. "His number's on the paper. He says he's got stories, a lot of them." Riley opened her eyes. She looked at Webb, and what passed between them was something that transcended rank and gender and age and every other category that human beings use to separate themselves from each other. It was gratitude, pure, unfiltered, the kind that rewrites the relationship between 2 people permanently. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, carrying the weight of a lifetime. Webb nodded, then he picked up his gear and walked toward the barracks, and Riley stood alone on the tarmac, holding a piece of paper with a phone number that connected her to a piece of her father she'd thought was lost forever. Cale approached her last. He waited until the tarmac had cleared, until every man and woman in the platoon had collected their gear and moved toward the barracks, until it was just the two of them standing in the morning light. He stopped in front of her. He was still in his full kit. Body armor, helmet dangling from one hand, rifle slung across his chest. He looked like what he was, a man who had just come back from war, but his eyes looked different than they had 8 days ago. The hardness was still there. The intensity was still there. But something else had been added, something softer, something that looked like the beginning of wisdom. "We used your entry technique," he said. 45-degree angled breach. Every room, both elements. "I know, Webb told me on the way out. It worked." "I know that too." Cale shifted his weight. He looked down at his boots, then back at Riley. "I detained a man instead of killing him. Ground floor, third room. He was raising a weapon. In 23 years, I would have shot him center mass without thinking. But I didn't. I redirected the weapon and took him down with a chest placement. Your chest placement. The same one you used on me on the first day." Riley looked at him steadily. And he's alive. And the intelligence he's providing right now is going to save lives. More lives than the bullet would have cost. How does that feel? Cale was quiet for a long time. The morning air moved around them, carrying the salt smell of the Pacific and the jet fuel from the helicopters, and something else, something that smelled like change. "It feels like I've been building a house for 23 years, he said, "and someone just showed me I forgot the foundation." Riley shook her head. "No, you had a foundation. It was strong enough to keep you alive through 5 deployments and bring your men home every time. What I showed you wasn't a new foundation. It was an addition. Another room, another floor. You didn't forget anything, Cale. You just hadn't finished building yet." Cale's jaw worked. He looked away, then back. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For the first day. For shoving you. For telling my men you were a babysitter. For every assumption I made about you before you opened your mouth. You don't owe me an apology." "Yeah, I do." "Then I accept it. And I'll tell you what my father would have said if he were standing here right now. What he would have said: the apology doesn't matter, Senior Chief. What matters is what you do next." Cale almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile Riley had seen on his face in 8 days. Not quite there, but close. Like a door that had been sealed shut for years and was now open just a crack, letting a thin line of light through. "What I do next," he repeated. "Yes. I've been thinking about that on the flight back. 4 hours in the air with nothing to do but think, and I keep coming back to the same thing." "What thing, Solace?" Riley's expression shifted. "What about her? She disarmed a man with a pistol in a room with non-combatants on her first real-world operation. She used the wrist technique you taught her. The angle changed, the grip reduction. She executed it perfectly. Webb says she moved before he could give the order. Says her body moved ahead of her brain. That's exactly what I told her it would do." "I know, and that's the part that keeps me up. Because 6 months ago I wrote her off, not officially. I never put anything in writing. But in my head, in the way I ran this platoon, I treated her like a liability. I kept her in the rear. I gave her support roles. I never once put her in a position where she had to lead because I didn't believe she could. And now she's got 2 lives on her conscience that exist because she was brave enough to move when it mattered. A woman and a 4-year-old girl who are alive right now because Mara Solis trusted her body and her training and the woman who gave her both." Cale's voice had changed. The command tone was gone. The authority was gone. What was left was raw, honest. The voice of a man standing at the edge of his own limitations and looking over. "I failed her," he said. "For 6 months I failed her. And if you hadn't shown up, if Warcom hadn't sent you, she might have gone through that door last night, believing what I made her believe. That she was less. That she didn't belong. That smaller means weaker, means expendable. But she didn't believe that. Not anymore. Because of you. Because of her. I just showed her what was already there. The same thing I showed you. The same thing I showed Delaney and Webb and every man on this yard. You all had it. You just couldn't see it because it didn't look the way you expected it to look." Cale nodded slowly. Then he said something that Riley would carry with her for the rest of her life, through every base and every training yard and every room full of skeptics she would walk into in the years to come. "I want you to come back," he said, "not as a guest instructor, not as a civilian contractor on a temporary assignment. I want to request a permanent training integration, your methods built into our standard operating procedures, your techniques in our combatives curriculum. I want every SEAL who comes through this command to learn what you taught us." Riley stared at him. That's not your call to make. No, it's not. It's Morrow's and Warcom's and probably a dozen other people with more stars on their shoulders than I've got hash marks on my sleeve. But I'll make the case. And when I make it, I'm going to tell them about the 41 seconds, about the angled breach, about a 22-year-old woman who walked onto the toughest training yard in the world and made every man on it better without throwing a single punch. And about Mara, especially about Mara, because Mara is the proof, not that your techniques work, that your philosophy works, that smaller doesn't mean weaker, that precision beats power, that trust beats fear. Mara walked through a door and saved 2 lives because you taught her that the fight isn't about winning. It's about making sure the people you love come home. Riley felt her father's voice again, distant, warm, carrying the weight of every lesson he'd ever taught her and every promise she'd ever made him. He'd be proud of you, Riley said. Cale frowned. Who? My father. He spent his career trying to change the way Marines fight. He never got far enough. The system was too rigid. The culture was too entrenched. He died believing his work would die with him. She held up the paper Webb had given her, the one with Patterson's number. It didn't die with him. It's right here, on this tarmac, in your platoon, in Mara Solace, in the man you detained instead of killed, in every room you entered at 45 degrees instead of straight through the door. My father's work is alive, Cale, and you just carried it into combat. Cale looked at her for a long time. Then he reached up and unclipped the bronze star from his vest, the one he'd worn on every deployment for the last 15 years, the one that represented the best and worst day of his life, the day he'd pulled 3 wounded Marines from a burning vehicle in Ramadi while rounds tore the air around him. He held it out to Riley. I can't take that, she said immediately. I'm not giving it to you. I'm asking you to hold it, just for a second. Riley took it. The metal was warm from his body heat, heavy, the kind of heavy that has nothing to do with metal. That's the day I thought defined me, Cale said. The day I was the biggest, the bravest, the most aggressive. The day I survived on pure strength and will. For 15 years, I wore that like it was the answer to every question about who I am. He took the medal back, held it in his palm, looked at it. It's not the answer. It's one chapter, and you just helped me start writing the next one. Riley nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Cale clipped the medal back onto his vest. He straightened up. He squared his shoulders. And then he did something that Senior Chief Petty Officer Damon Cale had never done in 23 years of Naval Special Warfare service. He bowed, not deep, not theatrical, a slight deliberate inclination of his head and torso, the bow of a student to a teacher, the bow of a warrior to a master, the bow of a man who had spent his life believing he had nothing left to learn and had just discovered that the learning was only beginning. Riley bowed back, equal depth, equal respect. They held it for 3 seconds. Then Cale straightened, turned, and walked toward the barracks. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Riley stood alone on the tarmac. She unfolded the paper Webb had given her and looked at the phone number written in pencil. Jim Patterson, 3rd Force Recon. A man who had served beside her father in the years before she was old enough to understand what service meant. She pulled out her phone. She dialed the number. It rang twice. Hello. The voice was older, rough. The voice of a man who had lived hard and survived. Mr. Patterson, my name is Riley Voss. Travis Webb gave me your number. I'm David Voss's daughter. There was a long silence. The kind of silence that holds 20 years of memory and grief and the unbreakable bonds that form between people who have carried each other through the worst moments of human existence. I know who you are, Patterson said. And his voice broke on the last word. Your daddy talked about you every single day. Every single bow, Riley. He said you were going to change the world. Riley closed her eyes. She let the tears come again. She let them fall on the tarmac at Coronado, where 8 days ago she had walked into a yard full of men who wanted her gone and had left them standing in formation, saluting her transformed not by force but by precision, not by power but by truth. I'm trying, she said. You're not trying, sweetheart. You're doing it. I heard what happened. Webb told me. You walked into a SEAL platoon and you turned them inside out. Your daddy would have given anything to see that, anything. Riley pressed the phone against her ear and felt her father's presence so close it was almost physical. Not a ghost, not a memory. Something more real than either. The continuation of a man's life through the work he left behind and the daughter who carried it forward. Tell me about him, she said. Tell me everything. And Patterson did. for 2 hours standing on a tarmac 3,000 miles from the man who had started all of this. Riley Voss listened to stories about her father that she had never heard. Stories about a Marine who believed that the strongest weapon a warrior could carry was not a gun, but an understanding of how the human body moves, how the human mind works, and how the human heart endures. Inside the barracks, Mara Solis sat on the edge of her bunk and stared at her hands. The hands that had disarmed a man with a pistol. The hands that had saved a woman and a child. The hands that had shaken for 8 days and had finally, in the moment that mattered most, been steady. Delaney walked past her bunk. He stopped. He looked at her. Solis? Yeah. Next training cycle, you're on Alpha Element. With me. At the 2 position. Mara looked up at him. The 2 position. Second through the door. The spot reserved for the operator the team leader trusts most. The spot that Delaney had held for 3 years. You're giving me your position, she asked. I'm not giving you anything. You earned it last night through that door. He walked away. Mara sat there staring at the space where he'd been standing, and she felt something break open inside her chest. Not pain, not relief. Something bigger than both. The feeling of a person arriving at a place they'd been traveling toward their entire life without knowing it. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a photograph she'd kept hidden since her first day at Coronado. Her mother, standing outside the diner in Oklahoma City, where she'd worked double shifts for 18 years to raise a daughter alone. In the photograph, her mother was smiling, tired, proud, holding a sign that read, "My daughter is a Navy SEAL." Mara held the photograph against her chest and closed her eyes. And for the first time in 6 months, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she belonged. 2 weeks later, Cale submitted his formal request to Warcom for a permanent training integration. The request was approved. Riley Voss was brought back to Coronado under a long-term contract to develop and implement a new combatives curriculum based on her father's methodology. The program was designated Voss Protocol. Within a year, it was adopted by 3 additional SEAL teams. Within 2 years, elements of the protocol were integrated into the Marine Corps martial arts program. Within 5 years, Riley Voss had trained operators in 12 countries, and the principles her father had developed in the years before his death had become a foundational component of special operations close combat training across the Department of Defense. Damon Cale served for 3 more years before retiring at the rank of Master Chief. At his retirement ceremony, he gave a speech that lasted 4 minutes. He talked about 26 years of service. He talked about the men and women he'd led. He talked about the missions he'd survived and the friends he'd lost. And at the end, he said one thing that made every person in the room go quiet. The most important thing I learned in 26 years of service, I learned in 8 days. From a 22-year-old woman who weighed 130 pounds and walked onto my training yard knowing I was going to try to break her. She didn't break, she didn't bend, and she taught me something that every warrior needs to hear. The fight isn't about winning, it's about making sure the people you love come home. Mara Solis was promoted to Petty Officer 2nd Class. She completed 7 more deployments. She became one of the first women to hold a leadership position in a direct action SEAL element. And every time she stacked up on a door, every time the countdown hit 0 and the breach charge fired, and the world on the other side was dark and unknown, and full of things that wanted to kill her, she heard Riley's voice. Trust your body. Your body is ahead of your brain. Let it lead. And she moved. Riley never stopped teaching. She never stopped walking into rooms full of people who didn't believe in her and walking out leaving them changed. She carried her father's lessons across oceans and continents and into the lives of thousands of warriors who would never know the name David Voss, but who would carry his legacy in the way they fought, the way they led, and the way they brought each other home. And on quiet nights when the training was done and the yards were empty and the only sound was the ocean against the shore, Riley would sit alone and dial Jim Patterson's number, and he would tell her another story about her father. And she would close her eyes and listen, and her father would be alive again, not in memory but in practice, not in grief but in purpose, not in the past but in every single person she had ever taught to fight, not with fist but with precision, not with rage but with trust, not with the need to win but with the will to bring everyone home. That was his legacy. That was her promise, and she kept it every single day until the day she passed it on to someone else and the cycle began again, the way it always does, the way it always will. As long as there are warriors who need to learn that the greatest strength is not the force you carry in your body, but the knowledge you carry in your heart. The fight isn't about winning, it's about making sure the people you love come home. And Riley Voss made sure they always did.